Hey, nice to have you guys back. So today we're basically focusing on how we can work on the register endpoint. We should be able to mimic what we have on the Postman platform right here. Right. So here, if you notice the design, for you to be able to sign up, you can sign up with a Google account or you can sign up with normal registration. Right. So this is what we're going to do today. We're going to actually start our server. I'm going to create a register endpoint. So from today onwards, user can be able to register successfully. Right. So first of all, let's watch our server, and then we can actually run dev. So once we actually have green lights in both of these commands, then we'll be good to go. All right, so while we're still waiting for it to start watching, but that's not really important. That's extremely important when you are developing. Since I'm just presenting a tutorial, yes, we're good. We're basically good here. We're good here. Right. So here, there we go. We can go check our close up everything, minimize, and then let's start from the router. From the route, you see that we have the index.ts. So now we'll be actually be using /auth to prepend all the routes under the auth router. So when you go to auth router, it's something like /register. So in the instance of it, it's going to be /auth/register. You get a point. So now you can actually see what we're doing right here. Right. So now this is our validation. We have two middlewares here. The first one is that we're using it to validate our input, our register input. So when you open it up, you see that we are taking in, these are everything that we are taking in from the user, as you see on Postman. You can see username, you can see the email, you can see the first name, you can see the last name, you can see the phone number, and then the password, just like the way it is right here. Right. So that's good. Go back to our route, and then we go to the controller, the register user controller. So the register user controller basically has the create user, the create users. We're using a lot of services, three services. We are using the user service. We are using the OTP service because once we are done creating the user, we have to create an OTP. Then we're using the email service. So once we are done creating the OTP, we have to email this OTP to the user, right? So that's actually how these services are, extremely vital, right? So let's focus on the first one, right? You can see that when you're done creating a user, you have to send an OTP to this user. So we have to create an OTP for this particular user, right? So why we are doing it like this is that once we actually open up the OTP model, which I will do later on, you see that it's linked to the user. The user and OTP has a one-to-many relationship. So a user can actually have many OTPs, right? So OTP can be for login, for register, for transactions, and so on and so forth, right? So now the first thing we do is to check the user service.create user. Let's create the user first. So click on the create user. So you can see what we have here. So you're going to return the promise of the user, right? So the user is actually what we are getting from the models itself, right? So the user is from the model. So these are all the inputs we are taking from the user. The email, password, first name. Remember, these are all the inputs right here. So email, password, first name, last name, username, and phone number. So there we go. The very first thing we do is that we actually will create the user. We open up the user model. The only thing that's very important here is the email. So we have to create the user email. So the way we separated it in such a way that the user can actually have a profile, can have an OTP, right? So as I was saying earlier, relationship between the user and the OTP model is just one to many relationship. But password, user can only have one password, user can only have one profile, right? So this is the way you specify the relationship between one model and another in Sequelize. All right, so we'll go back to our service. You can see that when we are done creating the user, we have to create a password for that user. And when we are creating a password, we have to make sure that we're not using the Google SSO. Google SSO will only make us to does not really have a very generic password. So that's why we're putting this condition here in case there is no password coming in. So when we are working on Google SSO later on, then we can be able to say, oh, this is definitely not a Google SSO. Then we'll not create password for that particular, um, you know, command, right? So we have the password here. This is what we're using to create a password, right? So create a password, taking password model, we're just taking a couple of things. Let me open it up. Just user ID and then the password you created. That's all. This password, don't forget, is hashed. All right, so back to the service. This is the way the password, we are creating the hashed password. So create password is using bytecode to sync that particular password, right? So that's just all. And if you notice, we have transactions tied to every model we create. That's because we're using Sequelize transactions right here. So what we are doing this is that there are situations whereby you might have network issues or an error can actually pop out. We don't want a situation whereby user is created, that user does not have password, does not have profile model. So what we now normally do is that once we run into issues like that, any error related issue, we just roll it back. It's as if you never even started in the first place. There will not be user, there will not be profile, password. Do you understand? So basically, that's how it works, and that's why we are tying this to transactions. Is until you commit it, that's where everything will be saved to the database. So don't forget to commit. This is extremely important. You have to commit every model you've actually tied with transactions. So we are creating a profile. We're taking first name, last name, username, profile, and phone number to create that profile. So you can see from here, that's all with the create user service. Nothing much. This is highly scalable and it's extremely wonderful. So go back to the auth controller and then you can see that we are creating OTP. What we're using to create OTP is very simple. We're just taking the user ID and then the purpose. You can see the purpose and enum of login and register. In this case, we're actually registering. So you can see we're just generating random raw OTP code. We're using OTP generator library to generate like 6 digits OTP. I'll show you how this works later. Right. So by default, it's not verified. We have a way of verifying our OTP. So it's when you verify your password, then we can verify this OTP that, oh, this OTP has been used. And meanwhile, the OTP actually have a trial limit as well as what expires at. Right. So I think by default, what we are doing here is that we're saying to 60. Right. So 60 minutes, 60 minutes, it's like 1 hour, something like that. And if you notice, what we are doing, we're trying to make sure that we do it in such a way that it expires. So if it expires, that means we can't use that OTP anymore. User will have to generate a new OTP. That's extremely important because you don't want to have your OTP lying around for a very long time. It needs to have a time span. Right. So that's the function for you to create your OTP. And then we'll go back to our controller. And then after we're creating this OTP, creating the user, then we'll now have to send it. We have to send an email to the user telling them that, oh, this is your OTP. Now proceed to verify your account. Right. So you cannot use that OTP to verify their account. You get the point. Right. So we're going to open this is actually present in the Sequelize service, which is the email service. Send OTP. I'll open it up. I can see that what we are doing here is that we are just sending the OTP to the user. So I've actually made a detailed video on how you can, send email using Nodes Mailer and Google App Password. Because while I did this video, you can actually see somewhere around at the top. I've linked it. And then why I actually did this video is because there's no good tutorials online that explains how you can use our passwords for, a non-mailer altogether in Node.js. Because previously we're using the less secure apps method for Google, but as at March, if I'm not mistaken, as at March 2022, they actually stopped the process. Now you have to use our password instead of less secure apps. So the video will be up here so that you can take a look on how everything works and sending email. So it's just basic stuff. So taking everything we need, like subjects, and so try to use handlebars to compile our HTML so I can be able to pass data into this HTML. So that means you can be able to use like site title, OTP validity, email within the HTML template. All you have to do is to just do something like curly braces, then you put these values inside. So all this has been explained in the video linked upwards. All right, so you can see that we are sending the email to the user, and then when we are done, we return this response alongside the user ID and the OTP ID. So we're going to head straight to Postman now so that we can basically see how this works in action. All right, so now we're on Postman, and then we want to create a user, right? So first of all, I would like to show you what we have on our database as it stands now. So let me refresh. We already have a user. I'll delete that user. So it doesn't. Good. So I want to create a user with this username, with this email, first name, last name, phone number, and a random password. So all I have to do is to just click on send. Good. So everything went on successfully, and then we have our user ID and the OTP ID. So what I normally advise is that when you are done like this, save an example of this file. You can do this by clicking on the save as example. So once you do that, it should have something similar to this, right? So that's normal. You can see that the front-end person can actually use this response. Doesn't have to call the API or do whatever. He can just use this response the way it is when he's trying to, try to code it appropriately. So you can see it says our response is successful. Then we have to check if we actually receive this within our what's it called, our database. You can check our database now. We have it right here. So he has not verified his email, which is a good thing. Has been created, and then we have to check our profiles, right? So let's open our profile, view, orals. Let's see if profile has been created for this user. You can see that the profile has been created for this user, first name, last name, phone number, and so on and so forth, alongside the user ID, which is very important. Now that we have that, let's see if a password has been created for this user. So you open up the password model, password table. You can see that an hash password has been created for this user. Wonderful. And finally, we have to check our OTPs. So you open up this, and what you see here, we want to check if OTP has been generated for this user. Good, wonderful. OTP has been generated for this user. This is the OTP code, and the purpose is register. Wonderful. It has not expired, and it has not been tried. Right? So now that we have all of this, I'm not convinced, right? We need to check our email if that actually went through. So I can definitely go back, open up my email. Here we go. Min1 OTP. So I'll click on it. You can see that our verify email alongside our OTP code went through successfully. Wonderful. Wonderful. So basically, that's it, guys, and we'll definitely talk more on how to can test this properly. I don't want to be using Postman for test. It's not automated, so I'm a great fan of automated testing. So we'll be using our test suite in this tutorial, so I can test this endpoint on different scenarios. So basically, that's it, and I'll see you on the next one.